We begin my top 24 remaining tight end rankings. Remember, tight ends who played on Thursday night, such as any Chargers or Broncos tight end, are not included in these rankings. We begin with what I think will be low end tight end twos. We have Conklin, Fant, Pitts, and Otten. So with Tyler Conklin, he's seen 5 targets in each of the past 2 weeks. And so while it hasn't yielded immense fantasy results, it's still decent volume, especially for a streamable tight end. And so in a game against the Rams, which is an advantageous matchup, I do project quite a bit of passing volume for the Jets, and so I think he's a decent shot as a streaming tight end. Noah Fant, despite a pretty pitiful outing, did see 7 targets this past week. Here against Minnesota, they do allow the 12th fewest points to fantasy tight ends, but it should be a pretty pass-happy game script, and so I don't think he's going to have a fantastic day, but I do think he hits a couple grabs. Kyle Pitts, after starting out the season incredibly poor, then having a ridiculous stretch, returned to irrelevance recently. Well, now that noodle-armed Kirk Cousins is out of the picture, I definitely think better weeks are ahead for Kyle Pitts, but not this specific week against the Giants. They do allow the third fewest points to tight ends in fantasy, and so I think he's going to see more volume and in general going to be a much better play. But I do want to see Michael Penix play, and this is a really tough matchup, so I would definitely be skeptical. Cade Otton has seen his upside basically be removed in the return of Mike Evans. And so against Dallas, who allowed the 8th fewest points to fantasy tight ends, I don't think he's going to have a fantastic performance or anything, but he has been getting some chunk gains recently, and he was just missed for a touchdown a couple weeks ago and did have a 30-plus yard reception called back due to penalty. And so I do think that the counting stats haven't really displayed how he's performed recently, but I still think in a really poor matchup with Mike Evans playing that he is absolutely a risky play, but I do think he gets a couple grabs. Now we have tight ends that I think are probably mid to low end tight end twos this week. We have Bellinger, Gray, Johnson, Schultz, and Ferguson. So Bellinger, since Theo Johnson was put on IR, had 7 and 3 targets in each of the past 2 weeks. Here against Atlanta, I think Atlanta is going to perform better than they were with Kirk Cousins. And so I think that obviously the Giants are terrible. And so it's probably going to once again, for the millionth straight week, be a pass happy game script. I think he sees some volume in this game, but I don't think he scores a touchdown. Noah Gray has seen 4 to 6 targets in each of the past 5 weeks. He's also scored 5 touchdowns in this time span. Here against Houston, it's a really tough matchup. They do allow the 4th fewest points to fantasy tight ends, but I do think he finds the end zone. Juwan Johnson has been a little bit hit or miss recently. He was limited with a foot injury, but I do think he's going to end up playing. He has Spencer Rattler starting, so the quarterback play is skeptical at best probably this week, but it is a really good matchup, and in my opinion, he's the best option because they're probably not even going to have Alvin Kamara this week. And so I think he sees increased volume, but I don't think he scores a touchdown. Dalton Schultz has been all over the place recently. Here against Kansas City, this is definitely a matchup that he should be able to exploit, but I do think he's going to be a Nico Collins shadow once again. And so I do think he gets a couple chunk gains, but I don't think he scores a touchdown. While Cooper Rush and CeeDee Lamb have been pretty solid fantasy options recently, Jake Ferguson has really been the forgotten man. Here against Tampa Bay, I do think he scores a touchdown, but I think his overall volume is once again limited. And now we have tight ends that I think are probably high end tight end twos to low end tight end ones. We have Kraft, Andrews, Freiermuth, and Ertz. Tucker Kraft is playing against New Orleans. They do allow the 11th fewest points to fantasy tight ends, and so it is a pretty tough matchup. I do think, though, that he ends up scoring a touchdown, but sees limited volume. Mark Andrews, in all but 2 weeks since week 6, has scored a touchdown. And so while he did go 2 for 22 with no touchdown on 3 targets the last time in which he played against Pittsburgh, it is an advantageous matchup, on paper at least. And so while I do think that it's going to be a tough physical divisional game, I do think he ends up scoring a touchdown. Pat Freiermuth has seen at least 6 targets in 2 of the past 3 weeks. He's playing against Baltimore. And so while it is on paper a tough divisional game, it is a plus matchup for him. I like that he's starting to see an increase in targets. And so I think he's going to have a solid fantasy day, but I don't think he scores a touchdown. Zach Ertz was limited with a concussion, but it was an upgrade in terms of his ability to practice. And so while it is a really tough matchup here against Philadelphia, he has been a really consistent tight end for us. I think he does end up playing this week. And if he does, I do think that he has some upside. I don't think he scores a touchdown, but I think he sees a good amount of volume. If you like what you're seeing and hearing so far, feel free to like and subscribe. It's a free and easy way to support the channel, and I'd really appreciate it. And make sure you check out my other positional rankings ahead of week 16. I'm going to be releasing quarterback, running back, and wide receiver rankings as well. Thanks. And now we have tight ends that I think are mid to low end tight end ones, but I don't think are likely candidates to be the tight end one this week. We have Hawkinson, Henry, Strange, Kincaid, Laporta, Njoku, and Kelsey. TJ Hawkinson has seen at least 6 targets in 3 of the past 4 weeks. Here against Seattle, it's absolutely a matchup that he can exploit. I don't think he ends up scoring a touchdown, but I think he once again sees good volume. Hunter Henry had a pretty rough outing this past week, but in general, he's been a really consistent tight end for us with Drake May. I think he has a decent game once again, but I don't think he scores a touchdown. Brenton Strange went 11 for 73 on 12 targets this past week. And so it's pretty fair in a great matchup here against Las Vegas to expect a decent performance from him. I don't think he's going to be seeing 12 targets every week, but I do think he's going to inherit the Evan Ingram role. And in this offense, Mac Jones and Trevor Lawrence love their tight ends. And so I think he's going to be peppered with targets and be a solid option for us this week. Dalton Kincaid went 4 for 53 on 7 targets in his return this past week. Here against New England, it's absolutely a matchup that he can exploit. I think he ends up scoring a touchdown in this game and is going to be a top 10 option for us. How about Sam Laporta? After a really slow start to the season, he started to pick it up with touchdown scoring, but then he went 7 for 111 this past week with over 18 fantasy points. Thank you. Here against the Chicago Bears, it's definitely a matchup that he can exploit. I think he's starting to look a little bit better now, and I think he's going to be back to being a regular top 10 option. David Njoku is questionable. I do think he ends up playing. The biggest issue, though, is they're no longer going to have Jameis Winston. They're going to have DTR starting. But that's kind of offset, in my opinion, by the fact that he's playing against Cincinnati, who allowed the most fantasy points to tight ends. I do think he's going to see a tremendous amount of volume, but I don't think he scores. Travis Kelsey, while still seeing 8 and 6 targets in the past 2 weeks, really didn't deliver. Here against Houston, while they do allow the 4th fewest points to tight ends, I do think he ends up scoring a touchdown and having a decent fantasy day as a top 5 option. And now we have tight ends that I think are elite options for us in fantasy this week and are likely candidates to be the tight end one. We have Jonnu Smith, Brock Bowers, George Kittle, and Trey McBride. All right, so in the past 5 games, Jonnu Smith has scored a total of 5 touchdowns and seen 8 or more targets in all but one of those games. Even in a tough matchup here against San Fran, a tight end getting this amount of volume is an automatic start. I think even if you have one of these other tight ends like McBride, Kittle, and Bowers, I think he is an absolute must play in your flex. Tight ends generally just don't see this amount of volume. And so with him, like I said, also scoring touchdowns, I think he is an absolute must-start tight end one, and I do think he scores another touchdown. Brock Bowers definitely has slowed down in the past 2 weeks. With the return of Aiden O'Connell, though, I do think that's going to help boost his numbers this week. Plus, he's playing against Jacksonville, who is terrible in terms of preventing tight end production. I think he's going to be a top 3 option for us once again, and I do think he scores a touchdown. George Kittle is coming off his lowest fantasy finish for a tight end this entire season. That was still the tight end 11, so that should tell you everything you need to know about George Kittle. Here against Miami, it is an opportunity for him to exploit. I think he ends up scoring a touchdown, and I think he's going to be a top 3 option. And now we have Trey McBride. In each of the past 4 weeks, he's seen at least 10 targets, yet he's still been unable to score a touchdown. He was tackled at the 1-yard line. I did cry. Here against Carolina, they allow the 2nd most fantasy points to tight ends, though. I think he gets it done through pure volume, and he is going to crush the Panthers. And so, to review, tight ends that I think are going to be low-end tight end 2s, we have Conklin, Fant, Pitts, and Otten. Tight ends that I think are going to be mid to low-end tight end 2s, we have Bellinger, Gray, Johnson, Schultz, and Ferguson. Tight ends that I think are going to be high-end tight end 2s to low-end tight end 1s, we have Kraft, Andrews, Freiermuth, and Ertz. Tight ends that I think are mid to low-end tight end 1s, but probably aren't likely candidates to be the tight end 1. We have Hawkinson, Henry, Strange, Kincaid, Laporta, Njoku, and Kelsey. And then tight ends that I think are firmly entrenched in the elite tier this week and are likely candidates to be the tight end 1. We have Jonnu Smith, Brock Bowers, George Kittle, and Trey McBride. All right, you know the drill. Who do I have too high? Who do I have too low? Is there a tight end that I'm not projecting for enough fantasy points this week? Let me know below in the comment section and let me know why. And also, make sure you remember that tight ends who played on Thursday night, such as any Chargers or Broncos tight end, are not included in these rankings. And make sure you check out my other positional rankings as well ahead of our Week 16 matchups. I hope you guys absolutely crush your matchups this week and win fantasy championships next week.